it might be time to panic on these players in fantasy football. So let us know what you think in the comments about some of these guys and what you're doing with them in your fantasy leagues. But I want to talk about Breece Hall first, because Breece, I thought he was all the way back, right? He had games of 21 and 26 after games of 3 and 6 in weeks 4 and 5. And then last week he came out against New England, and he again had 9 points. You saw Braylon Allen last week. I remember Braylon Allen from early in the season. Everybody's like, oh, he might do something this year. He vultured a touchdown, so he had 9 points as well. These guys had the same amount of production. Braylon Allen had 12 carries to Breece Hall's 16. And so what you saw in these games is you saw Braylon Allen actually cut into some of the workload of Breece Hall again. Now, I'm not concerned about this long term. This isn't this alone is not going to be a reason that I come out and say, okay, I think we're going to go and sell Breece Hall now by any means. I'm not even advocating to sell Breece Hall. But what I am saying is Breece Hall has been inconsistent, and regardless of whether you think that it's going to continue or not, one thing that I don't think you can deny at this point is that offense is bad. And that's concerning because, again, we like buying running backs on really good offenses. Buying fantasy football players on good offenses is just a basic way to set yourself up for success in your fantasy football leagues. And this there's no way around it. This is not a good enough offense. And that's why you've seen, Breece Hall, 46-19 in terms of snaps this week with Braylon Allen, 14-5 routes run, 3-0 targets, 16-11 carries. So the snaps versus the carries, obviously he's dominating Braylon Allen at snaps still, which is it's pretty typical compared to what it has been in the last couple of weeks. So I'm not necessarily more concerned about that any more than I was before. I'm more concerned about the offense. And look, I think even when we knew this last year, Breece Hall can overcome bad offenses. He's the running back 7 on the year. Last year, he obviously was the running back 1 or 2 and was on an awful offense. It was as bad or worse than this year's offense. But the thing with Breece Hall is I think he is probably still a top 8 fantasy football. He is probably a top 8 fantasy football asset. And so personally, when I'm looking at Breece Hall, what I really want to look at this point is, because he's not somebody you can't not start him, right? So who does he play in the playoffs? At Jacksonville in week 15, the Rams in week 16, and then at the Buffalo Bills in week 17. It's kind of a wash there because you have a good matchup with the Jacksonville Jaguars, a bad matchup with the Buffalo Bills, and then the Rams. The Rams have been a little bit hit or miss with their run defense so far this season. But personally, I'm not going to panic on Breece Hall. Obviously, he didn't have the touchdown. That was a little bit of an ugly game against New England. That offense, I feel like, can only get better. Can the offense get worse? I mean, you can tell me if you think it can, but I'm not going to panic yet on Breece Hall. I think that you hold him, you ride it out. He could end up being a league winner. He also had a much better second half of the season last year than he had at the beginning of the season, right? He started 15, 0, 3, 9 points, and obviously you say, okay, he's coming off of an injury. But it doesn't matter. After the bye week, he was absolutely dominant. And so I think you're going to hold him and hope for one of those post-bye week dominant sessions from Breece Hall. You drafted him to be a top 12, really a top 5 running back, and
you drafted him to be a top 3 running back, potentially RB1 overall.
And he's the 23rd overall player right now in full point PPR leagues. And when you're looking at half point PPR leagues, I'm sure he is slightly different than that, but 28 actually. Yeah. So
I mean, widely considered as the running back being taken in the same tier as Bijan Robinson, which was just behind Christian McCaffrey. It was CMC, Bijan, and Breece in the same tier, and then your next tier of like your Saquons, JTs, and Jahmyr Gibbs.
And Saquon, Bijan honestly hasn't really separated himself that much from Breece Hall this year.
No.
So it is just interesting. I'd personally hold him unless you can go get like a Derrick Henry or something like that. That's kind of my verdict on that. But definitely not super encouraged by what I saw from the Jets offense as a whole this week. So
it's pretty objective at this point, 8 games into the season, that Caleb Williams is definitely the answer to the Chicago Bears' years and years of quarterback woes. And that includes it being very, very true that Caleb Williams is a much better quarterback than Justin Fields. But even with that being the case, how the heck is it possible that DJ Moore is outside of that Carolina game averaging less than 10 points per game? It honestly is something that I did not expect to happen. We had to kind of warm up to the idea of liking DJ Moore as a price preseason.
Yeah.
Kind of jumped on the bandwagon a little bit late. Before we were kind of uncertain, but even when we were uncertain, never would have guessed that this production would be this bad.
No.
I thought at best, or I thought at worst, it would be boom bust, and that he wouldn't be like super reliable every single week. But he's just straight up not getting the opportunity and the volume that you expected. No. For a guy that's being paid as much as he is, for a guy that is as experienced as he is, 6 years of experience, 27 years old, coming off of a wide receiver one season, his breakout season with a terrible quarterback, and Caleb Williams is like not. I don't want to blame Caleb Williams. That's not the point. The point is DJ Moore is not getting the volume we expected. There are a lot of different things that go into this. Number one, I think you are seeing a lot of the same offensive situations in Chicago that Seattle was struggling with last year. If you recall, Shane Waldron is the OC for the Bears, and he was for Seattle last year. Do you remember what Seattle's offense looked like last year, the year before that? Kind of like a broken record, right? They kind of weren't calling plays at the right time. They were kind of hit or miss from a production perspective. They'd boom and they'd bust. They would use guys around the field at different times that just didn't make sense. It took them a while to figure out how to even use DeAndre Swift this year after they went out there and signed him as a first running back in free agency. And it was like, dude, is this guy going to do anything? He finally has, which is great. But I watch those games and I'm like, Caleb Williams is so talented. DJ Moore is so good. Rome Odunze is phenomenal. Keenan Allen is very reliable. DeAndre Swift looks explosive. How is this not all coming together and resulting in an ultra productive offense consistently? Some of it is the rookie inexperience. Yes, I will give that to Caleb Williams. I will give that to the offense as a whole. I will give that to the organization trying to figure it out with an actual quarterback. Some of it is really just the play calling and the coaching and the fact that your best player in DJ Moore not being utilized and not getting 8+ targets a game is just a joke. It's an absolute joke, and it's not DJ Moore's fault, in my opinion. I really don't think it's his fault. He cannot control getting less than 5 targets in a game. He can't control that. He can't control the amount of points that they decide to score in a matchup that really they should be scoring a lot of points. I'm panicking about DJ Moore personally because I think his rest of season outlook is way less than I thought it could have been after coming out of that Carolina game, coming off of the bye. You expected them coming out of the bye to look a lot better than they did, and they looked flat. They looked anemic, and they were really dependent on DeAndre Swift's breakaway touchdown to get them into that game. They had that last-second touchdown, and then Washington won it on that Hail Mary, but still, like, they only scored 15 points. We can't have this for a guy like DJ Moore, who's a wide receiver one in an offense. And again, it's not his fault. I'm definitely worried about it though, looking at the rest of the season, and I'd trust a lot of wide receiver twos in offenses more than I trust DJ Moore now, and I would not have said that a couple weeks ago. T. Higgins and Devontae Smith, give them to me. Give me other wide receiver twos and worse offenses that he's not producing. He's not.
Yeah, I'm a little bit more optimistic still with DJ Moore, but you're right. I mean, he's not producing. He's getting less targets than he was at the beginning of the season.
And again, I would love to be optimistic, but do you trust Shane Waldron to consistently do? He didn't show it in Seattle, and the offense looks the same. It looks just as bad.
No, you're right. So, I mean, that's an L on our part because we were, I was screaming to buy DJ Moore, and honestly, he hasn't done anything since I said to say that.
He hasn't done anything outside of the Carolina game.
So that one's on me, honestly. But let's go to Jordan Addison. We haven't talked a ton about Addison. We did say to buy him before he came back, which he looked good at first. He had 21 points in his first game back. He had a touchdown. But again, what we saw from Jordan Addison last year was he had 10 touchdowns, and he was a wide receiver 2, borderline wide receiver 3 with those touchdowns. He's wide receiver 69 this year. Nice. And I think the main thing for Addison is a lot of people are worried for a couple reasons. Number one, you saw him post the free 3 thing. Well, that's nothing. People are like, okay, he's trying to request a trade. He's clearly unhappy. That's like his nickname or something. So that's nothing. I don't feel like he's unhappy. He is getting less targets than I think he got last year by quite a bit. He was getting 5 to 6 targets on average last year. He's getting 3 to 4 targets a game. A lot of people are going to point, secondly, towards TJ Hawkinson coming back for this Vikings team and say that this is going to hurt Jordan Addison even further. My argument to that would be, I think that TJ Hawkinson coming back actually is going to open things up for Jordan Addison. Most of Jordan Addison's like really good, productive games, obviously because TJ Hawkinson played the whole season. Most of that came with TJ Hawkinson on the field. And I think, one thing that they've proven, Kevin O'Connell has proven for this offense, is that anybody can score touchdowns in this offense. And so when you take that away from Jordan Addison, naturally he isn't going to be that wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 level player that you saw last year. And pretty much anybody with half a brain expected him to be a regression candidate. Now, again, in the short term, TJ Hawkinson's probably coming back this week. I do expect Jordan Addison to get a little bit of a boost from this. And you might say, okay, it's going to be taking the targets away from. Now, there are plenty of targets to come from the tight ends for TJ Hawkinson. I don't think TJ Hawkinson is going to be getting targets at as high a rate as he was last year, simply because the Vikings aren't throwing the ball as much as they were last year. And that's another thing you have to factor in for Jordan Addison here is he's getting less touchdowns because he's getting less touchdown opportunities because he's getting less targets because there's less targets to go around. And so part of it is a volume thing. But in terms of his price right now, a lot of people are very disappointed in Jordan Addison. And honestly, I don't feel like it gets much better. I feel like at best he finishes as a wide receiver for the season, and I feel like that's being a little bit generous. But it's definitely in the range of outcomes for somebody who is as talented and on as good as of offense as Jordan Addison is. And so short term, I think he is going to get a little bit of a boost, and I think things will be opened up for TJ Hawkinson or for Jordan Addison with TJ Hawkinson coming back. It's just going to be whether or not he does get the targets that are necessary for him to produce in that offense. My guess is it's kind of a toss-up, and I definitely think that Jordan Addison has a chance to kind of disappoint for the rest of the season. So I personally, it's less panic and more so facing reality, in my opinion, that this is Jordan Addison without the touchdowns is a good NFL receiver, in my opinion, but not an elite fantasy prospect by any means. So.
Let's pivot over to a running back that is never pretty to talk about, but he has become a very viable starting option every single week. You got to start him every single week because he does have that consistent touchdown upside, and it is Brian Robinson. He's not flashy. He never has been, even coming out of college. He just never was that guy that everyone was super attracted to. But in the Washington situation with Jaden Daniels and his upside, it's become much more of a dynamic offense, and he's been kind of unlocked, honestly, this year more than he ever has been, and he's looked really solid. Now, he's kind of stuttered and sputtered the last few games and hasn't really been that. He hasn't done anything outside of the touchdowns he's gotten for the most part. He's coming off in an 8-point game against Chicago. He's getting volume, like 16 carries, 12 carries, 7 carries last 3 games, but the Carolina game where you expected him to be ultra productive ended up not being. 12 carries, 71 yards, a touchdown. His day was saved by a touchdown. The Cleveland game, 7 carries, 18 yards, 2 touchdowns, 13.8 points off of 2 touchdowns. Like, that is awful. Every time, I mean, he's scored so many touchdowns. So you're like, well, he's scored in touchdowns. He's also a running back. So yeah, it's volatile, but he's also getting this opportunity consistently. And they're in the red zone so often that it's kind of just baked into his price that he's going to have touchdown upside every single week, and you can kind of count on it. I will say with Brian Robinson, his ceiling is so low. Part of it is because Terry McLaurin is so good. Part of it is because Jaden Daniels has so much rushing upside. I mean, you're looking at Jaden Daniels. The dude is 75 yards away from 500 rushing yards on the season.
Yeah.
And he missed a game. He has had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. In seven games, he's ran for like 400 yards. It's ridiculous. And he's had 4 touchdowns on the ground as well. Something that we did not expect from Jaden Daniels heading into this year was how much he was going to throw the ball. He just threw the ball 38 times against Chicago. He threw the ball against Baltimore 35 times before that. And yeah, the first month of the season, it was a little less because he was a rookie. But that is incrementally increasing. He went from 24, 29, 23 to 30, 25, 35, 38 in his healthy games. The dude's passing volume is ridiculous. And what does that mean? The more Jaden Daniels passes the ball and the more he consistently demonstrates that his rushing upside is 50 plus yards every single game, the more you know it is a fact that Brian Robinson is going to get you 15, no more than 20 points, and he kind of has a pretty rough floor.
Yeah.
So to me, I'm a little bit worried about B-Rob's rest of the season outlook because Jaden Daniels looks so phenomenal. However, I'm not sure I would be going out and selling him at a discount right now. I do think he's more of a hold at the moment, and when he has another productive game off of multiple touchdowns, which he's had in the past, then see if you can go pivot off of him. We've seen plenty of deals go down with B-Rob, and guys are going out there and they're targeting players with higher ceilings that they can plug in their flex or plug in at their running back spot. That's just the reality with B-Rob. He's kind of just going to finish as I think high-end running back, mid running back 2 when it's all said and done, in my opinion.
Yeah. So let's talk about Deebo now. And you might be saying, okay, well, they lost Ayuk. They're getting Christian McCaffrey back, which should help Deebo. So why would you be freaking out about Deebo? And most people will look at Deebo's production in the last couple of weeks. 12 points against Dallas, like 7 targets. The main thing with Deebo and the reason you'd be panicking on Deebo is because he has pneumonia and he has a wrist injury and he also has a rib injury. And so with Deebo, the main thing with Deebo from a lot of his career is the fact that he has struggled to stay on the field, right? He really has in his career. 15 games, 13 games, 16 games, 7 games, 15 games. So he's missing games every year, and about half the time he's missing a significant amount of time in a season. He's the wide receiver 29 so far this year. I feel like he's being valued over that price point because people are baking into his price that Brandon Ayuk is gone. Now, I do think that with Deebo, you are potentially giving away a league winner if you trade away Deebo. If you panic on Deebo and you try to sell Deebo.
Especially with CMC coming back.
Absolutely. The one reason that I feel like, and he is on a bye. So this is why I'm not... With Deebo, it's so tough.
The bye could not have come at a
more perfect time. The bye comes at the perfect time. That's why I'm not going to say I'm panicking about Deebo. I am concerned about the durability of Deebo, the offense that has not looked great, but it is going to get better with Christian McCaffrey coming back. And look, like, again, when Deebo is on the field, he is getting the most amount of targets. He still led the team in targets, I think, last week, outside of the fact that he got 62% of snaps in this game. Still had 8 targets. Kittle was second with 7. Obviously, Kittle's doing more with those targets, but he also got 3 carries. And now the thing with that is you're going to see his carries decrease as you see Christian McCaffrey come back. They tend to use him less in that role when they have Christian McCaffrey compared to when they don't have Christian McCaffrey, and they also didn't have Jordan Mason for a stint last night. And he's been kind of hit or miss the last couple of games. And so with Deebo, I'm worried about the injury, to be honest with you, because I've always worried about injury with Deebo Samuel. That's just the player that Deebo Samuel is.
Yep.
He's just
Pierce
always
didn't look
injured.
half bad either.
He didn't. He got less targets.
Yep.
But that's the type of player that Ricky Pearsall is. These guys are different players. And Deebo Samuel will be relied on to be one of the main playmakers alongside Christian McCaffrey and George Kittle in this offense for the rest of the season. It is an offense, again, that hasn't been as good, but his upside is there, right? 20-point upside, which is slower than his upside a couple weeks ago. The thing with Deebo Samuel, there's a 3-game stretch there, weeks 4 through 6, where he had 5, 3, and 5 targets, and I honestly would have expected more from him then, especially during that period where Brandon Ayuk only produced, I think, 1 of those weeks. The targets last game were 7. I'm not panicked. I'm not going to say I'm totally panicked. I'm concerned about the injuries, but I think Deebo's upside is high enough to where you have to hold him because he could end up being somebody who wins you leagues. If you are panicked about the injuries, then I could definitely see shopping him, but I'm going to be patient. I'm going to expect the targets to go up after the bye week, and hopefully the bye week gives him a week to kind of recover from those injuries and come out strong for the rest of the season. I think second half of the season, if he stays healthy, obviously he's somebody who could be a league winner. By the way, playoff schedule, Rams, Dolphins, and then Detroit Lions in weeks 15 through 17. So we're looking at that now. It's kind of a decent playoff schedule. Some good matchups, some bad matchups. But honestly, with Deebo, it's more about his versatility as a playmaker and his potential ceiling with Brandon Ayuk out rest of the season. So
Jaden Reed has scored 10 points or less in 4 of the Packers' 8 games this season, and he's still the wide receiver 10. Still. If that doesn't scream boom bust, I don't know what else does. You want to see more of this? I mean, look at the games that he scored a touchdown versus not. At least a touchdown, 33 points, 27 points, 14 points. No touchdown, 6, 10, 13, 3, 7. Last 2 weeks against Houston and Jacksonville, 2 matchups where he really should have been productive, 3 points and 7 points, 4 targets and 3. The targets is what freaks me out the most. The only game he's ever had 8 targets was the Minnesota game, which has a really, really rough secondary. He's had 6-2, 6-8, 6-6, 4, and 3 targets. That's incredibly unfortunate. For a guy that we really liked at price, he has paid off at price. He has, but he has been way more boom bust than I expected, even. A lot of this has been to the true 1A, 1B, 1C, 1Ds that Matt LaFleur has been preaching all season. Romeo Doubs has gotten a decent amount of work. Dontavion Wicks every once in a while. I think the biggest concern and why we're panicking about Jaden Reed potentially for the rest of the season is the emergence of Josh Jacobs. I would be a lot more optimistic with Jaden Reed's rest of season outlook if Josh Jacobs had just kind of fallen off or been less consistent. Josh Jacobs, the last couple of weeks, which we predicted that he would figure it out and be able to bring in these touchdowns. 20 and 25 points, multiple touchdowns. Since week 5, he's had like 4 or 5 touchdowns, and he's getting a ridiculous amount of work. he really has been the reason that Green Bay has looked so much more dynamic as an offense.
Right.
And that has been at the expense of Jaden Reed's consistent fantasy production. He's such a good weapon. He was a big reason why they ended up winning that game last minute against Jacksonville, because he had that breakaway run that got him into field goal position. Love how they use him in the running game, but again, it's so inconsistent, even from a drive-to-drive perspective. He could be a non-factor for a quarter or two and then come onto the scene storming and getting like 100 yards off of 2 receptions. You just never really know with the guy. So a lot of risk with Jaden Reed. I'm not going to say buy or sell him because I think he's kind of regressed back to what his original price was because he is so boom bust, but definitely a guy that we're worried about for the rest of the season. He could ultimately cost you the season, or he could win you a couple playoff games. You just never really know.
I've thought he's overpriced for a while now. So I'm just being honest. So I'm totally with you. But,
I think that's fair.
But again, you can let us know if you're panicking on these guys. We're definitely open to. I mean, all these guys have some reasons to be optimistic at least. But do us a huge favor. Show some love. Make sure you drop a like. Make sure you're subscribed. We appreciate you guys. Peace out.